How do you see the new economy emerging, and what would it look like?
Well, it starts with a new story that we are living beings, born of and nurtured by a living earth, born of a living universe. So the as we get into an understanding of how life organizes, it organizes in community, essentially locally everywhere. But the starting point is a recognition that life can exist by its very nature. And this gets down to understanding, how life manages energy and water, nutrients, and information. Life can only exist in community. And that's all part of the story of how life essentially terraformed this planet and maintains the conditions of energy and chemical disequilibrium essential to the maintenance of life. So you get the community. Then you recognize that the decision making everywhere is local, and it goes down into the most micro elements of the organization of microbes in the soil or in our gut and so forth. Organizing as a community, and then manifesting upward in ever more complex system configurations that then create larger dynamics that, in terms of impact on climate and the sharing of resources and so forth, that then influence local conditions. But the decision making, at least as far as I can see, is ultimately very local. So you then say, well, okay, instead of organize, the two key things in terms of the organizational structure are values and power. So we currently, under the sacred money and market story, money is the defining value. And we organize around global financial institutions, and that is where the power resides. They essentially control the economic resources. As you noted, they're buying up land, water rights to seeds, everything that they can get a hold of to monopolize control of our means of living and extract monopoly profits from that. And there's a deeper analysis that goes along with that. We need to organize, starting that life is the defining value, and we need to align power with that value, which means aligning power with living beings and living communities that are everywhere local. So instead of organizing a global economy where we think we're being most efficient and wealth creating, if in Washington State we grow apples and we exchange apples with New Zealand, this is absurd. But instead, recognize that what we need to do is learn to meet our own needs locally in a balanced, co-productive relationship with our local environment. And that begins to look like what you guys are doing in Findhorn with your eco village, using your own resources, organizing community, working in co-productive partnership with nature to meet your needs. Now, you don't meet all your needs, so you exchange with your neighbors in a balanced, fair exchange, and that ripples out ultimately into an interconnected global economy, but one that is rooted in community and organized around life rather than one that is organized as a rapacious system responsive predominantly to global financial markets. Does that help?
That helps a lot, but I'm just led to ask this one follow-on question, which is, how do we transfer the power from where it is to where you'd like to see it go?
Well, the first thing is, again, the story. And, within that story, the awareness that the only power those global financial markets have is the power that we yield to them. Those institutions, the corporations, are totally human creations. Money is totally a human creation. I mean, this is an interesting thing about money. It has absolutely no existence outside of the human mind. There is nothing in nature that can even recognize it. Mm-hmm. And without humans as intermediaries, it would be totally irrelevant to nature. Mm-hmm. So, you know, my good friend Tom Hartman talks about walking away from the king. You know, the king is the all-powerful ruler, control of life and death. But if all the people walk away and say, you know, we're not interested in your game, it's not working for us, the king is absolutely powerless. And you know, that same thing is basically true in terms of our relationship to these corporations and financial systems. But it's recognized, you know, this larger flame recognizes that those people who are in the employ of those corporations are not free individuals. They're essentially working in conditions of serfdom to those corporations. And of course, there's a whole dynamic of debt that plays into that also. And anyhow, it's a larger piece of the story. But the fascinating thing is that, I mean, the overall system story touches on everything. So it's extremely complex. On the other hand, the foundations of it are the simplest, most basic, and most obvious truths. Real wealth is living wealth. We are living beings. The only power is our power in relation to nature. Money's just a number. You get those foundational ideas, and then the whole frame shifts. And we are in a position to begin fundamentally changing doing the things that you're doing in Findhorn, and that in fact people are doing all over the world who are in one way or another walking away from the system. And many of them because they were forced to. They're kicked out of the system. They're excluded. So they're doing what naturally comes to try to restore their lives, restore their means of livelihood, get control of their means of livelihood. But then the larger frame helps us understand what are the policies that need to change, what are the rules that need to change. And that gets into everything from the indicators by which we evaluate economic performance to the whole structure of our legal system that, that currently gives corporations more rights than people and gives nature no rights whatever. So almost everything in modern society in one way is upside down. So it's a huge challenge. And yet, I do believe if we can change the story, that's the key. Then everything else follows and can follow very rapidly. So that's why I'm so excited about your conference, and it is potentially so important to the human future.
What do you think we could most realistically do that would advance the new story?
The first challenge is to find it. To articulate it,
to give voice to the new story. Yeah.
Well, it's to give voice to it, but also it is. I believe the new story lives in the human heart, but as an articulated story that is shared in its framing and expression in a coherent way by some consequential number of people. It's not. We haven't got it yet. Different people have different pieces of it. But it's not integrated into a coherent frame like the corporate interest made a huge investment in developing the sacred money and market story and then promoting it through media and education, the legal system, and everything else they could bring under the control. Those of us who are aligned with the forces of life tend to focus on individual issues or stories of individual initiatives or around individual values. We haven't invested in finding our shared framing story that connects all the dots. And the key to me is living Earth. Earth is a living being. That's the foundation.
I mean, one last question. But I mean, suppose a wealthy hedge fund manager comes to you and says, "I like what you're saying. Here's a lot of money. What do we do with it?" What would you say?
The key is not money. The key is not money. I would invest the money in shaping the story. But here's the one. It's actually a conversation I'd like to have with Tom Steyer, given his hedge fund experience. The one opening for change within the system that I'm absolutely fascinated by is if we could organize union, public service pension funds, other socially responsible funds, use the techniques of private equity to buy out the big publicly traded corporations and convert them to cooperative worker ownership or other forms of cooperative ownership that shift the accountability and the power from their being captive to global financial markets to rooting them into community and accountable to real people who have a sense of their identity as living beings in a living earth and living communities. That would be huge. That would, and that is in a sense an inside the system intervention, but using the tools of the system to subvert the system.
David, thank you so very much for taking this much time to share with us your thoughts about a new story. And we certainly hope that you will be able to come over and see us someday. But in the meantime, thank you so much again for sharing with us today.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you.